everybody. Welcome back. You loved the last video, so we brought Greg from Alaska Energy Metals back to give us an update. Greg, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, Kev. Always great to talk to you.
Well, I'm excited to get you back because since we last talked, pretty much right after our last video, you actually had some pretty major news coming out. So why don't we kick it off there? Obviously, that's what people are excited to talk about. Let's talk about the mineral resource estimate. It was a big one. Do you want to share with investors, give us a bit of an overview? What did you guys announce?
Yeah, sure. I'd be glad to, Kevin. It actually worked out quite a bit better than we had even really hoped possible. You'll remember that in the summer of 2023, we drilled 8 holes. But fortunately, those 8 holes allowed our independent consultant to calculate using 35 historical drill holes, and that ended up making a much larger deposit than we thought would really occur. And so, and not only that, it moved a bunch of the resource into the higher confidence indicated resource category. We had 3.9 million pounds of nickel now documented at the indicated resource, and 4.2 billion pounds of nickel in the lesser confidence inferred resource category. Now, I can't really combine those two, but a quick person could do the math.
I mean, obviously, we're looking at over 8 billion pounds. You said million the first time. Yeah, 8 billion pounds. So, okay, we're talking significant numbers.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
a lot of nickel. And so that's great. It's a large deposit already with just one drilling program. But what was especially notable, 2 other points. One is that the strip ratio, that is the amount of waste rock that would have to be removed to get to the valuable rock, dropped a lot from our initial estimate all the way down to 1.5 to 1, which is great. But the best news of all was that we clearly documented that there is a higher grade core zone to the deposit that potentially could be mined early in a mining sequence, resulting in more rapid payback and better project economics without having to remove any waste rock to get at it. So I think that's a really important feature that came out of this resource update.
Well, congrats to you guys. And that happened directly after our last video. So I had to get you back to get into that.
Yep. No, we're really happy. We've made tremendous progress in just 1 year of operation.
And for anybody watching that wants a refresher on what that means and how a mine actually advances, I'm going to link it above in our last discussion with you, Greg. You actually gave us an awesome overview. So I'd encourage people to watch that. And let's maybe go backwards a little bit because some people watching this will be watching it for the first time. So now that we've kind of piqued the interest with this latest announcement, which is eye-popping, give us a little background, just a quick elevator pitch. Someone doesn't know your company. What's Alaska Energy Metals all about?
Sure thing. Well, we're a new company, only a year old, right about now that we formed the company around the Nikolai Nickel Project in Alaska. So it's a new company, but one with which I have a long history. I was first as a young geologist employed by Inco, one of the biggest nickel companies in the world at the time. And we found nickel back in the 1990s. I was able to reacquire the prospect, which we can now call a deposit of pretty major proportions.
Yeah, certainly. So this was a deal long time in the making. Back to the mineral resource estimate. When we were last talking, if I have the number correct, I want to say it was at about 1.5 billion pounds. Now we're talking 8 billion pounds. That's obviously orders of magnitude bigger. I remember we were discussing a bit about Canada Nickel, the size of their deposit, and it seems that you're catching quickly on what is a very large deposit. Correct me if I'm wrong, they're about 13 billion pounds. Is that right?
That's correct. I think Canada Nickel is a really good peer comparison for our company. And with just one more drill program, I think we'll be able to catch up to Canada Nickel in terms of the size of our resource. So far, and I think this will continue to be the case, our grade or concentration of metals is higher than Canada Nickel. And especially important is that we've identified that there is a higher grade core to our deposit that we would be able to pursue early in the history of a mine, which will really help with the early stage economics and overall economic viability of the project. I think about Canada Nickel a lot, and I see they're several years ahead of us, but their market cap is measured well over $200 million. Ours is only $30 or $35 million. So I think there's potential to catch up in a lot of ways in terms of size, grade, and value of our company.
And that's exactly what I was going to bring up, because on the last time you and I were chatting, we were kind of discussing what are some catalysts to look for, what is it going to take to advance the market cap of the company, and catching up to Canada Nickel in terms of the size of your resource was the big thing. But it's interesting, we're seeing this big resource announcement, and it seems like the share price just hasn't kind of appreciated that yet. Any obvious reasons why, or do you have an inkling as to why that might be?
Sure. Well, this is quite the business we're in, mineral exploration and development. It's hard to find a brand new mineral deposit, but it seems like you also have to find it at the right time when the commodity price is high to garner strong investor interest in the shares. And right now, the price of nickel is being depressed over the last year while we've been developing this great big nickel deposit. So that's the headwind that we face right now. It seems like Indonesia has been able to ramp up its nickel production to meet nickel demand, which has actually never been higher. But I don't think that can last. And the reality is that nickel produced in Indonesia is really counterproductive to the whole idea of using nickel in electric vehicle car batteries, because they're using coal to liberate the nickel from the ore there. And so it just sort of destroys the point of us driving electric vehicles if we accept that nickel into North American and European car batteries.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And even if we put that aside and didn't care about that, we were last episode talking about how Standard and Poor's was estimating a 20x increase in the demand for nickel in about another decade. So I can imagine, even if Indonesia wanted to ramp up big time, that supply is going to have to come from somewhere else, without a doubt, right?
It really will, and I think Europe and North America will demand, responsibly sourced metals in their vehicles. And there's a move afoot right now to differentiate between the different nickel, dirty nickel versus clean nickel.
Oh, that's an interesting distinction. Okay. We see the U.S. with such a significant focus on energy independence. Probably safe to say critical minerals are going to be next on the list. Obviously, we saw nickel was added to the critical mineral list. Does this tie into the Inflation Reduction Act at all? And does that impact you guys?
You bet it sure does. I mean, I think the IRA, or Inflation Reduction Act, is pushing adoption of electric vehicles, which is a whole new use for nickel. And so, yes, the demand should be very strong, but the United States, to me, is at great supply risk that could get cut off and disrupt a smooth expansion into electric vehicles. And so the United States would be much better off if it developed its own secure domestic supplies of energy-related metals, nickel in particular. And so that's why I think having a very large battery metals or energy metal deposit on American soil is really important for the country. And further, I mean, the current U.S. administration is really putting money where its mouth is and encouraging development of resources and sourcing metals from, if not directly American sources, from free trade countries. And they're offering incentives in terms of grant funding, which we've certainly applied for, which could make a huge difference for us too.
Yeah, certainly, I imagine. Currently, you mentioned that the U.S. imports 100% of its nickel, which I was really surprised to hear about that. I would imagine probably a lot of it comes from Canada, friendly nation where I am up in the north. How much of the U.S. nickel supply comes from nations outside of Canada or outside of North America in general.
Yeah, fortunately for the U.S., Canada's been able to supply roughly 50% of its needs. But I also see that Canada's strongly increasing its own consumption. It's building battery plants in on the eastern seaboard, and I'm not sure all that Canadian production is going to make it into the U.S. market anymore. So, out of necessity, that means the U.S. is importing a lot of nickel from non-free trade countries such as Indonesia, where unfortunately they don't share our same ethics and our same attention to environmental responsibility. I mean, in North America, we really do it right in the modern mining industry, and so we should do it in our own backyard. We should mine these metals responsibly right here in America.
And Alaska's got a reputation for responsible development. Gorgeous wilderness up there, so it's nice to hear that too. But a stable American supply of nickel only makes sense.
I've been living in Alaska now 30 years, and it really is a beautiful place. But we've got some fantastic examples of modern mining operation that are very protective of the environment and consistent with our values here.
And maybe I'm just kind of thinking of this now, something to remind investors watching. We were talking about the nickel price being a little depressed right now, but how we're expecting a 20x increase going forward. People need to realize also how long it takes to actually develop a mine. So for your project, I mean, if everything moves perfectly, we're still many, many years out from that happening. So we're going to be much, much closer to that supply and demand situation that we're talking about.
That's right. And,
Right.
in some ways, it's a contrarian play to buy our shares now. The price of nickel's low, but it's not always going to be low, especially in the face of the enormous demand projections. And so you've invested in mining stocks for a long time. And so, it's best, since it's such a cyclical industry, to buy low.
Mm-hmm.
And if you accumulate positions while prices are depressed, then you'll be rewarded when metal prices go higher.
I mean, there's few things with that kind of leverage to like the positive movement of a resource. It's not many stocks you can buy where you can open up your app one day and see like a life changing movement. It can be exhilarating. I'll say that.
Right. Yeah, and we've seen it recently in the uranium
Mhm.
stocks. And, for 5, 6 years ago, no one would touch a uranium stock, but the smart investor accumulated positions back then. And all of a sudden they're rewarded literally overnight.
Mhm.
And lots more rewards to come by the looks of it. So it's nice to see. It'll not be great to see other metals, especially the energy related metals, follow along behind.
Yeah, it feels the same way with even like Bitcoin over the last couple of years. The volatility when it's so low, nobody wants to buy it, and then as soon as it skyrockets, everybody's interested. It is placing those contrarian bets when you find something at a good price with a long term vision that makes sense to you. One of the reasons I follow this stock so closely.
Great.
um, why don't you talk us through the next, I guess, year or at least to the end of the year? What does the rest of this year look like for you guys? What's the roadmap?
Sure. Well, we've announced our resource now ahead of time, much larger than we'd been predicting. But the follow on that, then importantly, is how much of that metal is in recoverable form. And so we've got that work underway right now. We'll publish that in May. The initial results are looking fairly good in terms of at least we know that the nickel and the other metals are in potentially recoverable forms primarily, but we have to do that bench scale testing to get an idea of just how much of the metal would be recovered in a standard sort of processing arrangement. So that'll be important information to come out. But as soon as we receive that, the plan is to start drilling again, really focusing on that higher grade portion of the Eureka deposit, since it's so important for the project economics to get a good handle on that. As you know, we also have some great drill targets lined up to hopefully discover very high grade, massive sulfides, which would be a complete game changer. So, two prongs to our drilling approach this summer. But if all goes as planned, as we've projected a potential mineral deposit on that drilling, we can see that we should be very close in size to Canada Nickel's deposit by the end of this year, with a higher metal concentration, with a low strip ratio, and a high grade core that we can pursue early. They've got a positive feasibility study on their project. On that high level basis, ours should be too. And Canada Nickel's done a great job of breaking trail and securing strategic investors, major company strategic investors, two mining companies, and Samsung, a company that builds a lot of things, but is right now building big electric vehicle battery plant manufacturing in the United States. So they've done a great job with that. I would hope that we will also be securing strategic investors in the coming months or year as well.
When it comes to securing a strategic investor, I'm just curious, is there a certain stage in the process that you need to reach before they consider it, or is it something else?
Not necessarily. I know our company is already on the radar of some strategic investors. They like to see the project be de-risked a little beyond where ours is right now, though. Just a couple of weeks ago, we made that first big step of producing a bona fide resource in the ground, an official report conducted by an independent third-party consultant that signs off on the contained metals. So we've hit that first milestone, which will get us on the radar of strategic investors. But it's a time-consuming process. It'll take months to talk to various companies and ultimately to form an agreement. I saw with Canada Nickel that they had the first major strategic investor about 18 months before they produced their feasibility report, but then two other major strategics came in right after their positive feasibility report was published. So that's the sort of target area. And we'll begin those economic studies at the end of this year with an eye to completing the first assessments by the middle of next year.
And you mentioned summer drilling. Are we talking July, August is when most of it's happening, or can you get started sooner than that out
Oh, no,
there?
we can start earlier than that, probably around the first part of June, and get all the way through till early October.
Okay, so it's a fairly long season up there. Nice.
Yeah, yeah. Once we stick to the summer just because it's easier and cheaper. But once we're really drilling off at a closer spacing, an ore deposit, then we can go right through the year if we need to.
I imagine the climate's probably fairly similar to British Columbia, more like just wet than freezing.
No, this is in the central part of the state, and
Uh,
so it gets pretty darn
quite
cold
cold.
there in the winter. There's pretty high snowfall at times, but there's other mines in the area, and it's really no different than Yukon or northern British Columbia, interior northern British Columbia.
Right, fair enough. Throughout the course of this interview, we've touched on many reasons that an investor should consider your stock, but just I always like to conclude final message home to investors, just a few bullet points of why somebody watching this video would consider uh, opening up a position in your stock right now, which, as a reminder, is AEMC.V in Canada. If you're American, AKEMF. So, Greg, what
Right.
would you say?
Yeah. Well, in a nutshell, we've established that we have a very large resource of nickel with other metals like cobalt, copper, platinum, and palladium, and chromium to go with it. And it's in the United States, a secure domestic supply. But it's particularly attractive for a number of reasons, which include particularly the high grade core to the deposit, the very low strip ratio that we would have. That's to say, we don't have to move much waste rock to get at the valuable rock. And the fact that we have the potential to discover very high grade, massive sulfide nickel, which would really be a game changer for the company.
Excellent. Well, guys, we're going to have Greg back. Like I've said before, though, make sure you watch the first video. That was an excellent overview. It was a very educational video. Greg, you're a busy guy. You got lots going on. Thanks so much for taking the time. We always appreciate it.
Hey, Kevin, I'm very happy to update your followers and your shareholders.